Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Sponsored once again by On Fire Ministries, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and today on Patriot Radio, well, we're going to be talking about what actually happened in Seattle, as yours truly was on the ground with many other Christians and patriots on May 24th. And what's about to happen tonight, we might have some breaking news. In fact, I know we're going to have some breaking news here in just a few moments. And one thing that has just been released, the nail potentially in the coffin of the mayor of Seattle's case, somehow that the Christians were to blame. So we're going to get there here in just a bit. Here at Patriot Radio, we want you to have the information before everybody else so you and your family can be prepared for the times that are ahead and the times that are already upon us. So follow us on Telegram, patriotradio.us/Telegram, for real-time intelligence analysis and breaking news. Also, it is a time of prayer, so no matter what happens to us, we need to be praying with one another, and you can send in a prayer request at patriotradio.us/prayer. So, one of our main visions and missions here at On Fire Ministries is to go into the darkest places of the world. And this is nothing new. When the gospel of Jesus Christ is preached in the darkest places, well, the people sometimes that are under the influence of the enemy, they don't like it. But it doesn't mean you don't show love. You always show love. And that's why peaceful worship and prayer gatherings are so valuable. And today I'm going to announce a movement across the United States of America for June 13th. And as we talk about that movement, what can your church do in your local area to push back and make sure that there is not a rioting summer, but there's actually a summer of peace, joy, and hope? So that brings us to your wisdom from the word today, Psalm 55, verse 9. Confuse them, Lord. Divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city. Day and night they go around her upon her walls, and evil and harm are in her midst. Destruction is in her midst. Oppression and deceit do not depart from her streets. Also, Acts chapter 17 has another piece of this, and of course in the New Testament. And we are called into these places not to create contention, but to actually bring peace. It's very important. It's very important because ultimately the gospel of Jesus Christ does bring peace. So Acts chapter 17, verse 5. But the Jews, becoming jealous and taking along some wicked men from the marketplace, formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. In verse 9, actually verse 8, they stirred up the crowd and the city authorities who heard these things. So there's nothing new under the sun. What happened in Seattle, I think, has awakened the church. I think many people were asleep. They didn't believe that leftist violence was actually happening in the United States. And if it was, it wasn't in their backyard. But now it's become real. And the response by leaders, completely unconstitutional and really immoral, I think has emboldened the church to take a stand. And when the scripture says, resist the devil and he will flee from you, that word in Greek for resist means to take a public stand and speak out with your mouth the truth of God, and the enemy will flee. So, with that context, now your daily intelligence briefing. Coming to us from the globalist front.
The future is built by us. We have the means to make progress on the global agenda.
AI data centers, as they come online, are going to draw some power, or the same power, as 2 million homes. So, what is the answer? Well, the only real viable answer is going back to small modular nuclear reactors in designated areas, putting the power lines underground, which will make them resilient to storms and other natural disasters. It looks like nuclear power is not just back on the table, but it's back on the table for good. That brings us to the China front. China's claim over the South China Sea is based on the fact that Chinese ships navigated those waters 600 years ago, and they claim that those waters are Chinese just because those ships sailed there. Now, why is this important? Because the Philippines is claiming some of those waters because, well, it's theirs. And the quote is, "The greatest challenge we face today is the narrative the People's Republic of China is pushing that it has legitimate sovereignty over the entire South China Sea. This is the greatest lie we must confront. It is not just the Philippines' fight, it is a collective responsibility that all ASEAN nations must lead." So, China is receiving a ton of pushback, and that's going to continue as China continues to be isolated. South Korean liberal presidential candidate pledged to restore the South-North Korean hotline if elected. Also, the U.S. Navy, after a 4-day port call in Malaysia, re-entered the South China Sea on May 26th. So it went back. The Taiwan Strait has seen continued activity, and the Taiwan military is forming drone units to fend off a Chinese invasion. Also, the Japanese Joint Staff scrambled fighters to cope with a suspected intrusion into Japanese airspace over the Sea of Japan and the East China Sea. And Taiwan Marines carried out live fire exercises. In addition to that, South Koreans eye constitutional change to reduce the president's power after martial law. This is in the wake of the martial law that was declared and the constitutional crisis that has occurred there. And also, and not very well reported, the elections coming up in Korea here on June 3rd. Also, 500 military personnel from the United States in Taiwan is an open test of Beijing's red lines. Some analysts downplayed the number, but say the revelation puts Beijing in a challenging position. Washington's disclosure that around 500 U.S. military personnel are stationed in Taiwan signals more open and substantial defense support for the island. A pivot from a previously discreet partnership is openly testing Beijing's red lines. Yes, and in fact, those troops are there very likely as a deterrent. Also, what a picture. 2 Japanese Coast Guard vessels ramming a Chinese maritime militia boat whose crew illegally placed a Chinese flag on Japan's Uatsuri Island. And there you go. Check that out. That's kind of a picture for what's happening to China diplomatically over the issue of Taiwan. They are getting boxed into a corner. Also, that brings us now to the Middle East front. U.S.-Iran nuclear discussions. The United States and Iran held a 5th round of negotiations over the program. While it has been said that there are some positive outcomes and progressions in these meetings, they're still not really addressing the core issue. Zero nuclear weapons, we do have a deal. Zero enrichment, we do not have a deal, which is Iran's position. And it really has to be from an eschatological 12er Jafari school perspective. Also, When, if ever, will Israel strike Iran's nuclear facilities? Well, the answer to that question is probably going to be made in days, not weeks. And if the talks look like they're stalling or failing, Israel will pull the trigger. That is a sobering conclusion. Also, Netanyahu on Gaza aid distribution and bypassing Hamas control. Quote, Hamas remains like a fish out of water, end quote. And that is the first really overt statement marginalizing Hamas leadership in Gaza, because they will not be in charge as Israel takes Gaza over. Outright defiance against the Palestinian leadership as well happening today. And you can see that as one of the aid distribution centers was raided today. Control has been regained by a U.S. company, but they are not listening to Hamas leadership at all. Also, Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer personally warned French Foreign Minister and British Foreign Minister that if their countries recognize a Palestinian state, Israel may respond by annexing Area C of Judea and Samaria in the West Bank. That is gigantic. That is a huge statement. And that actually may happen even before an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. That brings us now to the Russia front. Geert Wilders threatens to leave the coalition government in the Netherlands if it doesn't swiftly take action to reduce immigration within the next weeks. He wants a total ban on asylum seekers and family immigration, the closure of asylum centers, deportations of tens of thousands of Syrians, and deportations of criminal migrants, even if it means breaking international conventions. A zero toleration system for migrants sentenced for crime, one offense, and they must be deported. Well, at least one politician over there is calling them on the carpet. We were going to see what happens, but I suspect there will likely be some disruption in European politics over this continued immigration issue, and they're going to fold, almost like French president under his wife's hand. But I digress. French farmers block traffic and protest rules. Farmers in France disrupted highway traffic and blocked roads in Paris Monday, protesting against proposed rules that they say would harm agriculture in the country. Current legislation is in regards to simplifying some of the approval process for farming, along with reauthorizing at least one banned pesticide. However, the legislation faces amendments. So again, the attack on farmers in Europe continues. On a good piece of news, Tommy Robinson was just released from prison and immediately announced he is going to do a free speech festival in London for tens of thousands of people and will have speakers over from the United States, Europe, and Australia. It'd be interesting to see if those speakers are let into the country, but I'm glad that Tommy Robinson is out, and I suspect Elon Musk and Donald Trump had something to do with that. Also, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz announced today that Germany, France, the UK, and the US have all lifted range restrictions initially imposed on Ukraine for strikes against targets in Russia, backing long-range missile and drone strikes against military sites and positions in Western Russia. Right on the heels of that announcement, Ukraine drone carriers launched their first long-range autonomous strikes. What does that mean? That means drones now can be flown into 300 kilometers into Russian airspace. Then you have the ballistic missile footprint that goes even farther than that. Most of Russia's critical infrastructure, this is the simplified version, is now in range of Ukrainian missiles and drones. Russia's foreign minister says that the Europeans can't join Russia, Ukraine, and the USA at the table for peace negotiations on Ukraine. Quote, they can only sit under the table, end quote. France is kind of losing some credibility worldwide right now. Also, Russia launches large-scale naval war drills in the Baltic Sea. And the United States, U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division, participated over the last few weeks in Exercise Hedgehog 25 in Estonia. This is a large-scale international military exercise led by the Estonian Defense Forces, and obviously a very clear show of force. You're going to see this continue in the Baltic states and in Finland as the United States flexes its muscle. Trump's message this morning, quote, "What Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad. He's playing with fire," end quote. Dmitry Medvedev responded, "Regarding Trump's words about Putin playing with fire and really bad things happening in Russia, I only know of one really bad thing, World War III. I hope Trump understands this." So the rhetoric ramping up between the United States and Russia. From American Kinetics, mass bomb threats target schools across Germany and Austria. 150 schools across Germany and Austria were targeted today. Messages referencing the Islamic State and containing violent religious language were emailed to institutions, prompting mass evacuations and nationwide police responses. This is going to continue, and it's going to probably go up 2-3 times a week now in Europe. And what happens in Europe will eventually come to the United States. So we're going to keep our eyes on this. And when we come back from the break, more from the National Front and what happened in Seattle.
Attention business owners and entrepreneurs. Patriot TV is launching a brand new TV series showcasing American-made products, and your business could be featured. Whether you sell your products online on Etsy or Shopify and dream of reaching millions of viewers on smart TVs like Samsung, Sony, TCL, and LG, or apps like Roku, Android, and Apple TV, this is your chance. We're searching for U.S.-based businesses offering all types of products and services proudly made in the USA. If you've ever wanted to showcase your products on TV like QVC or the Home Shopping Network, now's your opportunity. Support our American economy, grow your business, and be seen by loyal Patriot viewers across the country. Know someone with a business or have a business yourself? Don't miss out. Contact us at supportingpatriots.com today. Be a guest on this new exciting TV series. Let's put your American-made products in the spotlight.
The new Supporting Patriots show on Patriot TV spotlights great Patriot-owned companies and introduces them to Patriot consumers, encouraging them to buy American-made. If you're an America-loving patriot that owns and operates his or her own business, and you have Made in America products or services, you're the perfect candidate to be interviewed on the Supporting Patriots show. If you'd like to be considered for an interview, email us at supportingpatriots@patriot.tv.
And we're back with the National Front. Trump says Canada wants to be protected by the Golden Dome Space Air Missile Defense System. Then he says they will either have to pay $61 billion or become the 51st state of the United States. Trump says Canada is considering the offer. Excellent trolling there. Breaking. For the first time in Rasmussen's polling history, a majority of Americans say the United States is on the right track. So don't let the mainstream media try to tell you otherwise. Also, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton kicked off the House floor by the Sergeant at Arms. And, typically there is at least in Washington State, there was a courtesy extended that if you had ever been in the House before, you could be allowed on the floor. You had to get permission. So the rhinos in Texas, clearly obtuse to what is happening in America, and that we are going on the right track, they're continuing to kick against it. I suspect there's going to be some significant shifts in the Republican Party coming up in the midterm elections in Texas. Trump administration has paused international student visas as it weighs dramatically expanding social media vetting of applicants. Yes, about time. See what they're actually posting online and what they have in the past. Also, every state in the union should be following the lead of Arkansas, which is the first state in the nation to force a Chinese state-owned company to give up its American land. Amen. America first. President Trump calls Savannah Crisley to inform her he will be granting full pardons to her parents, Todd and Julie. In 2022, the couple was convicted of conspiring to defraud Atlanta banks out of more than $30 million. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Julie was sentenced to 7 years. They believe that the president will seriously consider pardoning both as a result of the unfair treatment they received in the criminal justice system, and it looks like at least their prayers and requests have been answered. Also, mark this day. Today, the COVID vaccine for healthy children and healthy pregnant women has been removed from CDC Gov recommendation for immunization schedules. And bottom line is, it's common sense and it's good science. Make America healthy again. Also, new info on the Trump shooter. Thomas Crooks was ordering bomb material that could take down an entire building, according to an estimate. So I think there's going to be a lot more coming out in the next 6 months over this issue. We're going to keep our eyes on it. There's a lot more tied to this than just some random guy. This has the hallmarks of a connected network. Also, Unity of Fields. Now, this is one of the pro-jihadi groups behind the Colombia protests, is also now urging people to hang up posters of Elias Rodriguez, the person who shot 2 Israeli staffers in Washington, D.C., in admiration of him. So the Marxist and the jihadi left cannot, in any way, shape, or form, say that this is peaceful. Their rhetoric has been inciting, and we're going to get to that here in a second, inciting violence against Christians and Jews, and it should be condemned by leaders. Instead, by not investigating and breaking up and disrupting these networks, these people are being emboldened. Also in Los Angeles, police cruisers and businesses were vandalized in lawlessness. Early Sunday morning, the LAPD did not make any arrests and allowed the chaos to ensue. Sources say the mayor gave the order not to make arrests. Again, we're going to follow that, but we got some cities that need new leadership. So that brings us to what actually happened in Seattle. Attendees of the praise and worship gathering hosted by Mayday USA told Jonathan Cho, they're on site, that we were there, and I was one of those people. There's my interview, that we were there for love. We were there to preach a message of forgiveness and healing. And almost immediately at 2:00, as soon as the event started, Antifa began to probe the lines and began to attack. Now, the Christians did hold the line. And then the police came in and started to make arrests as they got more and more violent. Now, they were throwing water balloons, water bottles, etc. at the peaceful worship and prayer gathering attendees. And they were hurling insults, spitting. So this was clearly not a show of love by the left. They clearly instigated it. Everything was on video. And I think it's time for the church, and this is what I told Jonathan Cho, it's time for the church to share the love of Jesus Christ in the darkest places of the world, and that we should be unafraid to do that. We came with love, they came with hate, and that prompted some reaction. The first was a statement by the mayor of Seattle that somehow the Christians should not have been there and should have been banned from being there. But before I get to that piece of it, Seattle redirected the Christian group, Mayday USA, to Cal Anderson Park from Pike Place Market. So this is important, and this is the breaking news. You're not going to see this anywhere else. We just released it on Twitter right now. It's coming right now. They're the ones that told the Mayday USA folks that it needed to go to a different park, and Cal Anderson was kind of their recommendation. And so the mayor of Seattle saying that this was an extreme right-wing rally. No, it wasn't. These are regular church-going Christians, and we have a right to exercise our religion and our First Amendment rights. All right? So what happened is they sent this statement out from the mayor's office knowing that this had happened. But wait for it. Here's the breaking news. This was 90 days before the event. And so March 11th, some coordination was being made, and you can see that the event was listed at Pike Place Market. And as soon as some of the folks helping with safety called the city, they were referred to the Seattle Fire Department. And when that email was sent to the Seattle Fire Department, within an hour, all of a sudden the event was removed. It was pulled down and didn't say Pike Place Market on the city website anymore. And then there was the recommendation for Cal Anderson Park. Very interesting what happened here, but that's the timeline. You can see that on our Twitter page. That's an exclusive as well. Now, hundreds of evangelical Christians are going to pack City Hall tonight. And in fact, in about half an hour, to demand an apology and resignation from Mayor Bruce Harrell because of his demonizing the victims of the violent attack. Now, I specifically posted a statement that this incitement of violence that has been happening over the last year, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish rhetoric like Free Palestine, globalize the Intifada, transphobe extermination squad, and this teacher kills fascists, resulted in the deaths of those 2 Israeli staffers in Washington, D.C., and within 72 hours, attacks on Christians. So I've called on the Trump administration, and particularly Attorney General Pam Bondi and President Trump, to investigate this organized crime network of Antifa, since obviously the local leaders are not going to do this. In addition, I want to read for you the Washington State Constitution, Article 1, Section 11. Absolute freedom of conscience in all matters of religious sentiment, belief, and worship shall be guaranteed to every individual, and no one shall be molested or disturbed in person or property on account of religion. Article 26 is even better. The following ordinance shall be irrevocable without the consent of the United States and the people of this state. First, that perfect toleration of religious sentiment shall be secured, and that no inhabitant of this state shall ever be molested in person or property on account of his or her mode of religious worship. They're clearly not upholding the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, the Seattle Police Guild put out a statement as well, condemning what Antifa has done, but also condemning the fact that they have been reduced in staffing. And again, Bob Ferguson, very late. But he, of course, is he going to condemn? No. He's not going to condemn the violence. And I think right now that Harmeet Dillon and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice needs to get involved, because this is clearly an attempt at attacking Christians. Not just in this park, but across the United States. So, June 13th, no king but Jesus.us. We're going to be praying, taking communion, fasting, worshiping, and declaring that there is no king but Jesus around the United States of America. I want everybody to join us. We have already dozens of churches that are coming on board. So I look forward to that. And when we come back from the break, an interview with an expert on the jihadis, Robert Spencer.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
What do a neurosurgeon, a country artist, and a television and radio host have in common? They all saw the writing on the wall. Big banks sharing your financial information with big government. Join them as owners in Old Glory Bank, the pro-America online bank that protects your privacy, security, and liberty. Invest today at own.oldglorybank.com.
And we're back, and our guest today is Robert Spencer. He's the director of Jihad Watch and a Shillman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. He's also the author of 29 books, including the New York Times bestsellers, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. Always great to have you back on, Robert Spencer. Thank you, especially with some of the things that have been happening in the last 72 hours.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it very much. It's always good to talk to you.
So let's talk about the incident in Washington, D.C. There's been this huge ramp up of rhetoric, even coming from the United Kingdom, Canada, and France. It's been anti-Israel, and more specifically, it's really been calling for blood, and all of a sudden blood is spilled. What's your reaction to that, and what do you think we should know?
Well, I think that it's very clear, yes, this is the result of a year and a half of incitement since October 7th, 2023. There's been an incredible demonization of Israel across the board with these charges of genocide that are repeated at the highest levels. The killer in Washington last night was a socialist, and he's a member of a socialist group that actually put out a poster that said, "Eliminate Zionists," something like that. And so he took that literally, and that's direct incitement. It's very clear that when you have this endless drumbeat of rhetoric that says Israel is committing genocide, which is absolutely false, that Israel is starving Palestinian children, that the last thing was a UN official actually claimed that, 18,000 children were going to die within 48 hours. This was absolutely false. And based on a projection that over the next several years, 18,000 children might die of malnutrition if humanitarian aid is restricted to Gaza. And he took that and said 18,000 children are going to die in 48 hours. This is the kind of thing that gives violent leftists the idea that they are being right and righteous when they commit acts of murder like the one we saw outside the Jewish Museum in Washington.
And I know that the Trump administration is trying to address this. There are American contractors that are on the ground right now that are providing even more aid into Gaza. But the fact of the matter is there really hasn't been a genocide or starvation in Gaza, even though Hollywood, as some people call it, is putting out these propaganda pictures and films that they're not even from Gaza. A lot of them were just imported and then cut and pasted into something. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why are they doing that? Why is the United Nations consistently taking a stand against Israel? We'll start there.
Well, the United Nations is controlled in the first place by two large voting blocs, and that is the socialist, internationalist, leftist governments of Western Europe and elsewhere around the world, and then also the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is 57 Muslim governments, that is 56 states and the Palestinian Authority. And those two essentially control the UN, and they come together because the left loves Islam. The left loves Islam because, in the first place, socialist internationalists love that Islam is an internationalist religion. They know they can't stamp out religion. They tried before in the Soviet Union and Communist China, even going back to the French Revolution. But now the radical left has learned its lesson. It's not going to eradicate religion. It can't. So it's going to try to co-opt it by taking this religion that lends itself to authoritarianism. You notice there are no Islamic republics, with the exception, no majority Muslim states that are actual republics, with the marginal exception of Turkey, which is actually becoming less of a republic by the day as it re-Islamizes. And it was only a republic in the context of a rejection of political Islam. But Islam lends itself to authoritarianism. Muhammad said, obey your ruler, even if he's an Ethiopian with a head like a raisin. And so the idea is obey your ruler no matter what. That's music to the left's ears. So the UN, which wants to establish authoritarian internationalist rule, thinks Islam is a natural partner in this. And so they hate Israel because, of course, it's the foremost enemy of the jihad, and as in its particularity as a Jewish state, is also opposed to the collectivist vision of the socialist internationalists.
So you have Israel, which has been fighting in the Middle East for freedom for a long time now. It was birthed in war, and now the United Kingdom, France, and Canada not overtly, directly threaten Israel in the last week, and then this incident happens. Why do those three supposedly free countries find it their necessity to attack Israel?
Well, I'll tell you, it's all the same answer in all three cases, and that is each one of them have rapidly growing Muslim populations that have gotten to the point where they are controlling the political discourse. And these leftist politicians who are in charge of each of those three countries know that their political futures lay with appeasing Islam. And that if they start to oppose jihad violence, and particularly the jihad against Israel, they're going to be thrown out of office. And so people talk about, is it too late for Europe? Well, the biggest indication that the answer to that may be yes is the fact that it is not now possible for a politician who is opposed to Islamization to be elected and become Prime Minister of Great Britain or President of France or Prime Minister of Canada. The Muslim voting blocs and their leftist allies are just too large.
And I think that for Western sensibilities, we don't really understand the threat of Islam, and people say, some of the rhetoric is just rhetoric. They're just blowing off steam. But you have Yemeni kids at a Houthi rally saying very loudly and very clearly that they want to drink the blood of the Jews that are killed. And then you have the red-green axis here, and that's the alleged killer from last night, clearly a communist, clearly at a communist answer rally. And I'm going to get to the red-green axis here in a second, but the fact is that the rhetoric coming out of Islam is really being subtly adopted now internationally and globally.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, it seems as if there were very powerful forces, and I have no idea who they are, but nonetheless, it looks as if October 7th was known to be in the offing, and when it happened, there were powerful forces that were poised to start this information battle and to, as they put it themselves, globalize the intifada, that is, to make an international movement out of the jihad against Israel. And they've done this very skillfully by marrying it to the left's Marxist rhetoric of the oppressor and the oppressed, that Israel is the white oppressor and the Palestinians are the indigenous people who are oppressed. This is total nonsense, but it meshes perfectly with the idea in Islam that this is Islamic land that belongs to the Muslims, and thus the Jews are occupying it illegally and have to be driven out.
And I think you made a very good comment earlier about the idea that the globalists are adopting an international religion. Let's put up this post that came out of Texas here recently, from Marxism to Islam, essentially saying very clearly how Marxists have chosen Islam as a religion. I'm sure there's way more on the internet that we could find, but this is very recent here, May 2nd. Is this something we're going to see more of in the future, you think? And then the question that would follow that is, how do we stop it?
Yeah, much more of it. And this is because, as I explained, Marxism started out as an atheist movement, and it's still officially an atheist movement. But you know, what's interesting about that, Matt, as a matter of fact, is that the great Soviet encyclopedia, the official encyclopedia that was published by the government of the Soviet Union before it fell, said that Islam is just another pie in the sky, by and by, one day you'll get your reward, but you have to suffer in this world kind of religion. Well, that was a big misunderstanding. Islam is not like that. Islam says that Allah will bless you in this world as well as in the next if you were obedient to him. It's very oriented toward having the kingdom on this earth. And so that meshes perfectly, and now the Marxists are discovering that with Islam. And so as the Marxists realize that they can't eradicate the religious impulse from the human heart, they see in Islam a kindred in that they want to establish this earthly paradise of alleged justice, which is actually the rule of the brute force of the ruler. As the Sharia ruler who will cut off your head or cut off your hand or whatever for getting out of line is becoming one with the Marxist commissar who will likewise throw you into the gulag for getting out of line.
So Kanye West has recorded a track called Heil Hitler. Then he comes out after the events last night and says that he disavows anti-Semitism, that he is sorry for the pain that he has caused. I hear some of that, and then slowly it goes back the other way. Well, what is your thought on not just Kanye West, but what is your thought on the folks that are suddenly saying, well, you know, maybe we made a mistake here? Because the rhetoric had ramped up for years, as you said before this, and it seems like they wait until people kind of go back to sleep and then bring it back.
Yeah, I think that that's what's very likely going to happen in this case with Kanye. I mean, of course, he's already well established that he's not a stable character. This is not a guy who is psychologically well adjusted. And so I don't expect him to be consistent. I'm glad to see that he's renouncing anti-Semitism, but I wouldn't be in the least surprised if he picks it up again next week. If he were to say, I am not going to accept any money from my Hitler song and I'm withdrawing it from circulation, then we might have something. But as it is, he's just emoting, he's just really deflecting criticism in the moment while attention is on these murders. And once the news cycle moves on to something else, he's very likely to just go on. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism has become quite fashionable. A lot of people on the right particularly associate it with the leftists and their hegemony that we have all suffered through over the last few decades. They associate that, in other words, with the Jews, and they think we need to free ourselves from that. It's all part of America first and so on. I think this is a drastic misunderstanding of what it means to be America first, and it's a dangerous blind alley, but I don't think it's going to go away because of these murders, unfortunately.
When we come back from the break, more with Robert Spencer. We're going to be talking about the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, the Red-Green Axis, and is America first compatible with supporting Israel?
American business owners, you understand the power of TV. If you have a product that you want to sell to millions of like-minded Americans who value quality, hard work, and supporting the red, white, and blue, Supporting Patriots is the perfect place. If you're ready to bring your product to a patriotic audience eager to buy American, then contact us today at supportingpatriots.com and secure your spot on Supporting Patriots. Let's build a stronger economy. When we buy American, we support our future.
I couldn't give anything a higher endorsement.
I would be remiss had I not include Cardio Miracle on my very short list of secrets.
It's the real deal. It's a real product. It's not another supplement.
I'm operating about 6 to 8 hours, and I've noticed that being on this Cardio Miracle has made a huge difference.
Since I started taking Cardio Miracle, about 8 months into it, the benefits have been fantastic.
You know, if I get hungry, then I just have a Cardio Miracle.
Not only is it safe, but it's necessary to take Cardio Miracle to stay well.
This let me sleep and feeling up more energy, more get up and go, and it's all because of what this company does.
For me as a doctor, Cardio Miracle is a staple.
Cardio Miracle to me is hope in a glass.
To try Cardio Miracle for yourself and get a special fan discount, go to the host page right now and click the link for Cardio Miracle.
And we're back with our guest, Robert Spencer, jihadwatch.org. Robert, a lot of people asking right now, is America First actually compatible with supporting Israel? And there's you have a Christian perspective, but the America First folks say, well, we're going to leave that out of it. I don't think you can, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right about that, Matt. It's very important because a lot of people are saying that Israel is just a drag on America's resources and so on. And I really don't think that they've thought this through. America First does not mean and has never meant America alone. America has always had allies and needs allies in the world. And Israel is a very valuable ally to have because America has benefited from Israeli military technology and other forms of technology just as much or more than Israel has benefited from American technology. It's a mutual relationship. It's not all one way. Israel is the only free republic in that region, and Israel is also facing the same jihad that the United States is facing. It's the same enemy. Not many people remark on this, but the people who hit the towers on 9/11 had exactly the same ideology as that of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Islamic Republic of Iran. We're all in the same fight, and we would be foolish to turn away people who are in the same struggle with us, and even more foolish to ally, as unfortunately it looks like is happening right now, but I'm hoping that there's going to be another shoe to drop, ally with people who hold to the ideology that ultimately calls for America's destruction.
There are, well, first of all, that is a very good point that, we are facing the same jihad. India, another ally against the jihad, no question about it. Doesn't mean we agree with Hinduism if we're Christians. I get that. But really, I've come against this replacement theology in Christianity that is just swept through in recent years. And I don't want to necessarily get too deep into this, but where is this ultimately coming from? That the Jews are our enemies, the Jews are this global conspiracy, when very clearly it has been a 1400-year war of the West against Islam, and there is no question about that, and many books have been written about it.
Well, I tell you, I think that when you're talking about Christians, it really is the reappearance of this replacement theology that is causing a lot of the trouble. And the idea is roughly that the Christianity, the church, is the true new Israel. And because the Jews rejected Christ, therefore they are now enemies of God and enemies of the church, and the church inherits the promises that were made to them in the Old Testament. That's the idea in a nutshell. So when I see it from people in my own church all the time on Twitter and so on, they say Israel is the church. Israel is not this country in the Middle East. And I think this is not really a matter of the name of it. The support that we should have for Israel is not actually based upon an understanding of Christianity. I don't actually hold to that theology, but even if I did, that does not blunt, as you noted, the force of the jihad that is arrayed against a nation state that does exist, that has a perfect legal right to exist, that is the only state under international law that has any claim to the territory on which it is located. And that is a matter of simple justice, that we should support that state as we should support any other state that is the target of an ongoing, aggressive, unprovoked war and holds to the values that our nation holds to, and is perfectly legal under international law. This has nothing to do with biblical prophecy or one's understanding of it. The matter of supporting Israel is one of simple justice.
And I think there's a level too here regarding communism that brings clarity to this as well. I mean, there was a shrine at KGB headquarters in Moscow against the Jews. It was very anti-Semitic. Communism always has been anti-Semitic. Karl Marx as well. And so you have two clear enemies of the United States and Israel, and now they're in a red-green axis and really always have been. Why does that not bring clarity that, hey, maybe we should be on the right side of history? We should be on the right side of justice. We should protect and defend the West.
Yeah, you said it, man. That's exactly it. The problem is that people are not aware of these things. And one of the staples, I just wrote a book, Anti-Semitism, History and Myth, and I discussed this at some length in there. People associate communism with Judaism, and it's a staple of the anti-Semitic literature that's spreading around nowadays again, that the communism is some kind of Jewish plot. Well, there were Jews among the Bolsheviks who took over Russia. That's undeniable. But was it a Jewish movement? Actually, you look at it, and it's exactly as you said. Karl Marx wrote a very little-known treatise that needs a lot more attention, where he said that the capitalists are Jews and the Jews are capitalists. He made exactly the opposite equation and said that the people who we are fighting against are the Jews, because they are the controllers of global finance and the owners of the banks and so on. So for communism to exist, Judaism has to be eradicated. And he was very clear about this. As you noted, the Soviet Union was deeply anti-Semitic. Stalin, as he died, was in the midst of beginning a new pogrom of the Jews, which probably would have killed as many as Hitler did if he had continued it. And this is not something that is extrinsic or accidental to communism. It's basic to communism, because communism is collectivist and wants everybody to be the same. And the Jews are the one people that have always refused to assimilate and wanted to keep their own customs and traditions and beliefs. That's antithetical to the whole communist impulse. And the communists know it very well. That's why they hate it.
They do. And an anecdote from my own family, the Christians that came from the former Soviet Union, and many of my family members suffered persecution there. My father-in-law was in the prison camps. His best friend was actually in the Gulag with Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So this is an anecdote from direct experience. They would actually watch what would happen to the Jews first and know it was coming next to the Christians. And that is how they acted to protect themselves in the former Soviet Union as the underground church. And I want to shift now to the Muslim Brotherhood here in the United States of America. I was very disturbed, as I'm sure you were, to see the appointment of two very questionable characters, I'm putting it very nicely right now, to a religious liberty position, antithetical to what these guys believe in and espouse. How are we going to stop this infiltration of the Muslim Brotherhood, even into the Trump administration?
Well, it's unfortunate. It looks as if Trump is listening to the wrong people. A lot of people have identified the negotiator, Steve Witkoff, as the problem, that he is somebody who is way out of his depth. He is not knowledgeable about the history of the region. He's not knowledgeable about Islam or its imperatives to control and conquer and subjugate and so on. And yet Trump trusts him 100% to the extent that anybody who criticizes him gets thrown out of the inner circle. This is what I'm hearing. The only thing we can hope for is that people who do know about the jihad threat will remind Trump of his own earlier statements about how Qatar is not to be trusted, that it is aligned with the global jihad force, that he'll realize that Qatar was allowing the Hamas leaders to live there. They're still there, as a matter of fact. And so this is an ally of the United States. And, Trump is, I think he's got an incredible intuition that has led him right on so many issues. I'm still hoping that he will come around on this.
So should we designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization here in the United States of America? And then why hasn't that happened? Because it seems like this is a no-brainer.
Well, the second question first, why hasn't it happened? Because the Muslim Brotherhood is infiltrated into every level of the U.S. government. Biden, when he was running in 2020, he did a video conference with Engage, which is an organization that's designed to get as many Muslims elected everywhere as they can. And he promised them that he would appoint Muslims at every level of his administration. He did. They were all Brotherhood guys because that was who he was listening to and who he was tied in with. And many of them are still there because it was not realized that these were political appointments, or Doge hasn't gotten to them, or Trump doesn't realize, or whatever. But a lot of them are still in place. And these people are actively subversive, and they've prevented for years now any real action on CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, or other groups that are linked to the Brotherhood. These guys are very well tied in. They are deeply infiltrated into the government, and nobody seems to be on the case.
It would seem that if the Holy Land Foundation trial and all of the unindicted co-conspirators upheld on appeal is already out there, that investigations and probable cause, exists, that investigation should be started immediately. But there seems to be a political component of this that, well, some of the Muslim brothers are actually trying to go legit, and we should give them the chance to go legit. How do you answer or respond to that?
Well, I remember Ismail Royer, who's one of these guys on the Religious Freedom Board. He served 13 years in prison for terrorist plotting. He was a hardcore jihadi, and now he claims that he's reformed. He contacted me a few years back. He really, really wanted to have a meeting. I was deeply suspicious, still am, didn't have the meeting with him. But I'll tell you something, if Trump or the people around him want to be responsible about this, I'm not saying just distrust the guy and throw him out, but they need to get somebody knowledgeable in who knows about Islamic doctrine, Islamic theology, and who can ask Randall Royer, Ismail Royer, if he still believes in the Quran when it calls for jihad warfare and the subjugation of unbelievers. And if he doesn't, then in what way is he still a Muslim? And if he does, then in what way has he actually reformed? And why can't we, why is it that we are still in the scenario that I thought we would be through with when Biden left the White House? Why are we still in this situation where we get guys like this who served time for terror activities, and they're on this board, but not a single critic of Islam is on the board? Those guys, all of us, you and me and the rest of us, we're all still poison, and nobody will talk to us. Whereas a guy like that just gets taken for granted at face value that he's on the level. Trump is a very savvy guy, and he ought to be more savvy about this.
When I got my degree in history, I always learned, and it was very much pounded into my brain, that you should rely on primary source documents. And so when we actually go read the hadiths and we go read the surah and the sunnah, we read all of these things in the Quran and the Tafsir Ibn Kathir, and I can say, look, I'm taking you at your word. Do you believe this? And I look at all as our universities saying Reliance of the Traveler has the stamp of approval for all of Sunni Islam. And people don't know what to say when I bring that up and say, what does this say? And so how do they reconcile? Here is what the actual documents say. Here is what they have espoused publicly. They will never deny ISIS. They'll never deny Al-Qaeda. They'll never say that they're apostate, but that they're actually following Islam and they're following Sharia. How do we break through this cognitive dissonance of here's what's said, here's what's being written, and yet you're saying, no, there's actually some deeper meaning you don't understand?
Well, we got to keep pounding the truth about Islam out there as much as we can, because this is exactly the problem right there, that you got a guy like Royer, and, now he'll say, well, I'm a moderate or whatever, and I believe in peace. And nobody knows enough about what's in the Quran or what's in the Hadith or what's in the Sirat Rasulullah. Nobody knows what's in those things, so they don't know what to ask him. And they just say, oh, okay, well, they figure, that there must be peaceful stuff in the Quran or a peaceful sect of Islam that he's now a member of, and they have no idea. So there needs to be a tremendous educational effort, which, of course, you and I and many others have been trying to mount for years to make it so that a guy like that cannot be so brazenly deceptive and get so far. But you'd think there are some people in the administration who do have some knowledge of what the Islamic texts and teachings are all about. And I hope they get access to Randall Royer and Hamza Yusuf and ask them some of the pointed questions that need to be asked.
Yeah, I hope that there is vetting that returns, and maybe a 30th book. Maybe that will tip the scales. Who knows? Robert Spencer, thanks for joining me on Patriot Radio. Yeah, God bless you and keep up the fight.
You too. Thank you.
Robert Spencer, Jihad Watch. So what can you do? Well, first of all, get educated. If those words and the title of those works sent you spinning, go check them out for yourself. You can actually get a PDF of The Reliance of the Traveler online. Go read what it says. When it's permissible to lie, what jihad actually is defined as, warfare against non-Muslims. And not some theoretical or symbolic warfare, but actual warfare is what they meant. And if we can have the honest dialogue, let's look back at history. Because for 1,400 years, the actions of Islamic armies have been in full and complete alignment with their writings and what they have said. So this isn't some like shoehorning or taking things out of context. Perhaps instead, it's going to be up to us to educate our friends and family, and more importantly, those that serve in the Trump administration, so that we understand that we're actually in a war to defend Western civilization and pass it on to our posterity so that it doesn't die with us. This is Matt Shea. Thank you so much for joining me on Patriot Radio today. May God bless all of you. He is making this generation the greatest one, so keep up the fight.